awards banquet that we've held here at the Oakland District Labor Council. Usually it's substantially a lot less people than what we had this evening, and it's great to see so many people here in support. Tonight, we'd like to thank Kevin Flynn, the MPP from Oakville. Amrit Marjat, the MPP from Mississauga, Brampton South. Gary Carr, the Region of Halton Chair. The Acting Mayor of Oakville, Roger Lapworth. He's a Town Councillor from Ward 4. Alan Johnson, Regional Council, Ward 1, Oakville. Pam DeMoff, Town Councillor, Ward 2 in Oakville. Mark Grant, Town Councillor, Ward 5, Oakville. Max Kahn, Town Councillor, Ward 6, Oakville. Tom Adams, the Town and Regional Councillor from Ward 6 in Oakville. John Taylor, City Councillor, Ward 3 in Burlington. And somebody who I don't have on my list here, but I did see him, Walter Malkowicz, the former mayor of Burlington, is here. Nancy Hutchison, the OFL Secretary Treasurer, is here with us this evening. And Marie Clark Walker, the Vice President of the Canadian Labour Congress. So, moving right along, we're going to move into the awards, and we're going to start off with our first award, which is our Political Activist Award. I have the honor this evening of presenting Gary Beck with this award. Getting a good chuckle about it. But Gary's the president of my local union here at Unifor Local 707. Over the past 10 years, he's been our president. He's been re-elected 4 times as president, and possibly could be one more coming up in the spring. Gary's been there through thick and thin. We've had some tough negotiations with Ford Motor Company, who I know some of them are here with us this evening. He's also been there to help bring people along, and bring people like myself, Tim Batke, Nadia Collins, Ron Balaz, and the list goes on and on, along as political activists along the way. It's with the influence of Gary Beck that a lot of us are here today. And Gary, I have somebody that wanted to present the award to you on your behalf. So George, if you can come up. George Hicks is going to present this award. George is I think he's the longest serving executive of any organization in this country. George recently turned 82 years old, and he's a long-standing part of this Labor Council. He's been there since the beginning, and he's the only financial secretary and treasurer that I knew up until 2 years ago when Nadia took over. But George is now a trustee of the organization, and George is going to present the award to Gary tonight. So Gary, back to you.
Hey, George! It's an honor to present this award to Gary. He deserves it, because I've known him a long time, and he's always done good work. Always worked for the union, that's the main thing. I never seen him take a backward step all the time I've been in office, and after I retired. I've been retired 22 years now. So with this, Gary, I wish you all the best.
Well, thanks very much. It's actually kind of nice to stand in front of a podium without being booed. So it's been tough in the auto industry, so you can only imagine the feelings people have towards me some days. But again, it's an honor, it's an absolutely privilege to stand up here and get an award from George Hicks, because George Hicks is like a second father to me. He's brought me along over the years and has taught me well. But this award is not about Gary Beck, this is about my membership, Local 707, because without their support, I would have not been able to do what I've done today. So again, thank you on behalf of the membership, because they're deserving of this award, not Gary Beck. Thank you.
Our next award is our Linda Jones Women's Activist Award, as it says in the program, but it's actually the Linda Jones Memorial Women's Activist Award. Linda lost her fight with cancer in November of 2012, and it was shortly after the award was presented last year that she lost her battle. At this time, I'm going to call on Sandy Corrigan to come up and present the award.
It is my privilege to present the Linda Jones Women's Activist Award for 2013. The Oakville and District Labor Council initiated this award in 2012 in honor of Linda, and I was extremely proud to be the very first recipient last year at this very event. And so, why an award for Linda Jones? Linda was an incredible woman and an activist who sadly lost her battle with cancer last November, and she's greatly missed in the labor community. She was a proud elementary teacher and a passionate union member, a leader with committed involvement to the Halton Women Teachers Association and the Halton Elementary Teachers Association. She was the first vice president of the Oakville and District Labor Council, a member of the Peel Halton Dufferin Training Board, and a labor rep on the United Way Board of Directors. In addition, Linda was on the advisory committee of Service Canada Board of Referees. Linda had a strong political voice, and she worked tirelessly on behalf of the NDP at the municipal, provincial, and federal level. Linda challenged politicians, and she was very vocal both in person and in print about her views on education, social justice issues, and workers' rights. Linda campaigned for healthcare reform, and she bravely fought her own personal battle with cancer after losing her beloved daughter to that awful disease. Linda always walked the talk. She was a champion of workers' rights. She always stood proudly in solidarity with her brothers and sisters, and she was my mentor and dear friend. Tonight we are recognizing another incredible woman and activist who is very deserving the Linda Jones Women's Activist Award. Like Linda, Marg McFarland is a proud elementary teacher and a passionate union member and leader. She is a persistent and hard-working president of the Halton Elementary Teachers Association. As you know, last year presented many challenges and unprecedented controversy for education sector unions, and particularly for ETFO local leaders. Despite the turmoil, when the going got tough, Marg stayed true to her union roots, rallying members and promoting the collective bargaining rights of all workers, including teachers. The political activist Eli Wiesel says, "There may be times when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest." Marg is a passionate champion of social justice, and she is committed to the principles of fairness. She will not do what's easy, she will always do what is right. Marg has a long history of unionism, and she is dedicated to helping people. In our local, she has been a union steward, an executive member, the vice president, and now the president of the Elementary Teachers of Halton. She has marched in many a Labor Day parade, proudly waving the ETFO Halton flag. She is an avid supporter of public education and public health. She is a very vocal opponent of public-private partnerships. Marg serves on the board of the Community Development Halton, and she works tirelessly on behalf of the Terry Fox Foundation. She's a longtime ODLC delegate, and she's been a delegate at both the CLC and the OFL conventions. Marg is a well-informed, reasoned voice, and she has an unwavering belief that workers' rights are human rights. She is a strong and committed advocate for positive social change, equity, respect, and tolerance. And so, to paraphrase Martin Luther King Jr., the ultimate measure of a woman is not where she stands in moments of comfort or convenience, but where she stands at times of challenge and controversy. Marg always stands proudly in solidarity with her brothers and sisters. She is my mentor, and she's my dear friend. So please join me in congratulating Marg on this well-deserved award.
I'm speechless, but I know there are a number of people in the room who wouldn't believe that. Rob. It is an especially wonderful honor to receive this award that is named after Linda Jones, and you heard a number of wonderful statements made about Linda. Linda has always been and will continue to be an inspiration for those of us who work in the labor community, who strive to make a difference and work in social justice and equity circles, trying to make improvements where we can. The one thing I want to be sure to convey today is that while this honor is much appreciated, it really is something that cannot be earned by a single person. We in labor, in nonprofit organizations, in any organization trying to make a difference in society in general, rely heavily on the people around us. And you can bet any winner, any recipient of an award will tell you they surround themselves with wonderful people, people who are passionate and committed to numerous causes. So this isn't a singular award, it really is something that encompasses many, many people. I'm very proud to represent the elementary teachers of Halton. We came through a very, very difficult time last year, as many of you will know, and we're certain, given some of the campaigns and future attacks on unionism, we know that our work is not finished. We also know that unionism itself and supporting collective bargaining and workers' rights is one part of the work we do. I've mentioned others. Any list I would attempt to convey would not complete or would not include all of the things that the activists in this room work toward. Thank you very much, and I hope everybody has a wonderful evening tonight.
Thanks, Sandy and Mark. The next award is our ODRT, OFL Disability Response Team Award. And for that award, I'm going to call up Nancy Hutchison from the OFL and Nancy Clark from the OFL ODRT.
Thank you, brother. And sisters and brothers, when I look around the room, I'm sure we're all in heaven, because to see a room this packed with activists in health and safety and compensation and in the labor movement and in the community, this is simply amazing, and I congratulate the Oakville and District Labor Council for being able to fill a room like this so we can all hear about what's important in life, in health and safety, and similar to the award we're handing out now. It's a little rough day for me, and a lot of my friends in the room have been comforting me because I lost. But I know there's a lot of dog lovers in the room, and so many of my friends have been helping. My German Shepherd died yesterday, and 2 hours before she passed away, I was throwing a stick to her in the park. And so many of you have been helping me with my grieving. But I also realize that if I feel like this, there's so many of us in the room that have witnessed and have been involved with family members that have had a fatality in their workplaces, where you leave your loved one, whether it's an animal or your child or your husband or your wife or your father or your mother, and when they walk out the door or you walk out the door, your life can change in an instant, and the lifelong grief that's going to come with that. So all of us in this room, and we're going to hear from the fabulous Stephen Lewis that talks about what's important in life and how we have to protect each other and become activists to do that, because none of us want to suffer the grief of losing a loved one or something we love, because we often never get over it, and it's preventable. In many of our cases, it's preventable at a workplace. We don't have to be diseased, and we don't have to die on the job. And that's why we're here, sisters and brothers, to make sure that we do one step further to make sure that doesn't happen. And the award recipient tonight is a person that's on the front lines of the compensation side. So we know in health and safety we're trying to prevent the accidents and fatalities. But when they happen, families and activists and injured workers need help, and they need a place to turn to fight the compensation board and other authorities out there, whether it's someone trying to block benefits. So our recipient, who is, and I know I'm just reading the Occupational Disability Response Team, is the program that we run through the OFL, and it's a fabulous program, and I ask all of you to get involved in your locals to get someone trained, because that person is doing God's work. When there's a family in need that has nowhere to turn, often English isn't the first language, and Jim Watson, John, I'm sorry, John, I know you forgive me tonight, and I talked to John Watson, and my maiden name's Watson, for God's sakes. But John Watson is that person in the room who has been doing this work for a long time, cross-pollination too, of health and safety and compensation. So you deal with the widows and the widowers and the family and the people that talk about suicide because they've lost everything. And it's the Johns of the world that bring this all together to make sure people are treated with dignity and respect. And the Nancy Clarks, who is really part of the program, who's instructing and writing the programs to make sure this happens. So John, would you join us up here on the stage to accept your honor and of your colleagues and peers.
Chance to talk that he's been an instructor not very long for the ODRT, but he's been an activist for a lot longer. And as Nancy said, there's a few of us that are a little strange because we do both health and safety and compensation at the same time. And I think we're kindred spirits, John, that we both do both. So congratulations.
Just a quick word. I'll speak somewhere between an worker and an elementary teacher, so it'll be short and sweet. One of my favorite thoughts in the world is that government, I hear there were government officials here, a government has a moral test, and that moral test is in the dawn with how a society treats their children, in the twilight how a society treats their aged, but I think more importantly about the lives of those in the shadows, the poor, the sick, and the disabled. And if you stop and think about how we treat those people, that's how we will be judged as a society. I'd like to thank the ODRT because they gave me the training and the courage to go and help. People like Albie Aksa certainly are someone that's wanted to us in our spirits. I want to leave you with a thought. Everyone's job has joys. Mine has greater joys than any other job out there. I am the happiest person in the world dealing with some of the most unhappy situations. When you sit down with an employer, with a widow, as they tell you they're appealing the compensation benefit because they felt it was too much. You sit there with the widow and she looks at you and go, is this the way we are thanked for our work? And I said, no, it is the way you were thanked for having given up a loss. So you go and you fight, and you'll fight, and you'll continue to fight, not for what I think that woman deserves, because what she deserves is her husband back, who was a victim of mesothelioma, a dreadful disease caused by asbestos. She deserves to have those last 6 months of his life erased from her memory. And any money that we can ever win for her will never replace what she's lost. The disabled worker is never whole, but there's an ability within disability, and I think I'll leave you with the thought that Stevie Wonder told me. He says, you don't have to see to have a vision. Thank you very much, and have a great evening.
Okay, our next award is our Health and Safety Activist Award. In your program, it just shows that it's a Health and Safety Activist Award, but this award comes from the Workers' Health and Safety Center. Between the Workers' Health and Safety Center and the United Way, there are two of the key sponsors that have helped with this event over the past 13 years, and they've been key contributors to our Labor Council. At this time, I'm going to call on Lori West and Peter Dulio to come up and present this year's award.
Hello everyone, and greetings from the Workers' Health and Safety Center. As Dave said, this award has been going on for over 15 years now. Every year we present an award to someone that's shown incredible dedication and commitment to health and safety in the workplace. And this award they've been nominated by their peers, which makes it even more special. And these folks that do health and safety in their workplaces, it's not a walk in the park. It's they have a lot of issues in the workplace to deal with, but at the same time they're trying to help their coworkers, and they get flack not only with their employers at times, but with their coworkers as well. But these folks that get involved, they do it for one reason, because they truly believe in what they're doing. It comes from their heart. They do walk the talk too, and they just don't deal with it in their workplace. They take it outside to their homes, their friends and their family, and they deserve a lot of recognition for this. And I want to introduce Peter to present this award to the recipient this year.
Thank you. It's been said of this year's winner that he has for some time and continues to put his whole heart and soul in his community and workplace. He is a past unit executive member. In 1999 through 2004, he served as chair of the Collective Bargaining Committee. He is a Freedom of Information Officer and a Health and Safety Representative the past 13 years. Since 2011, I have had the pleasure working with him on the Oakville District Labor Council. Ladies and gentlemen, please acknowledge this year's Workers' Health and Safety Center Health and Safety Activist Award winner, Mr. Mark Winton.
I just want to say a couple things. Thanks to Peter and Lori. Activists do things because they really feel. There's no money in it. None at all. If you want to say nice things all the time about issues, people will actually pay you for that. If you want to be an activist, you do it out of love. You do it from your heart. There's no other reason you do it. The other thing I want to say is I feel humbled because as far as health and safety goes, we have an Occupational Health and Safety Act, in part because of tonight's speaker, Mr. Stephen Lewis. He's well known for his AIDS activism. Not so much maybe now, as time has passed, of his work with the Elliott Lake miners. Instrumental in getting the actual legislation. It's the reason we have it, partly due to Mr. Stephen Lewis. And I feel humbled specifically tonight. For getting this particular award. Let nobody be under the misapprehension that we have universal health care just by chance. We don't. And we don't have an Occupational Health and Safety Act because of just by chance. It is because of activists. It is an often thankful task. You have to endure quite a bit of negativity now and then, but in the end, it's worth it for everybody. And I think history shows that. And in particular, especially what we have today. We are a developed nation, that is true, and we have a lot of rules about eyeglasses and safety footwear and helmets and all these things, but rest assured, somebody did lose an eye, somebody has lost a foot, somebody did lose their life. And that's why we have this stuff. And I, for one, am glad to do it. Thank you.
We have one final award, but it's not to say that it's our least favorite award. It's one of our favorite awards here at the ODLC. It is our Barney Banavec United Way Social Activist. Barney Banavec was a longtime activist through CAW and UAW 707 at the Ford plant. He was very instrumental in getting the United Way campaign going within the plant. It's actually very touching tonight that although 90% of this room is labor activists, my employer, Ford Motor Company, is here this evening, and they get to see some of the work that our activists get to do on a daily basis and what we do for our members. So this award, which is named after one of our members, I'm going to give it to Rita Thompson to speak.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for being here tonight and supporting the Oakville District Labor Council. Tonight I have the pleasure to introduce a person who is not only my friend, but also an activist and a humanitarian, who through her dedication and commitment was able to make an incredible difference in every community that the United Way touches. This year marks a point in time, which I'm sure has to be a record, 20 years. For 20 years, this devoted United Way union coordinator, Ford Motor Company employee, and member of CAW Local 707, now Unifor, faced the challenge every year of going out on the plant floor and asking her co-workers to make a contribution to a charity that was very close to her heart. Through her efforts and the hard work of all her canvassers that she worked with over the 20 years, an incredible, are you ready for this? An incredible over $6 million was raised at Ford. What an achievement. benefited from this hard work and perseverance have this person to thank, my friend, Sue Tipo.
What do I say? Work for them.
This is a first. Thank you so much for this wonderful Barney Vandenbach Award. I am very much honored to accept it. For 20 years, I have had the opportunity to make changes in community and people's lives. How great is that? There is no greater feeling in the world than to help those who, for whatever reason, can't help themselves. It has been fun, challenging, but also rewarding to organize all those campaigns, and I enjoy every minute. Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful citizens can change the world." Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Well, I could never have done these things that I did without the help and support of the canvassers that I have had the pleasure to work with for the past 20 years. And from the bottom of my heart, I thank each and every one of them. So thank you for this lovely award, and remember, change starts here, and it starts with every person in this room.
I hope everybody's enjoying the meal and the awards part of the event. I know if you're not eating yet, you will be soon. John Watson looks at me like, dying. But we've come to the conclusion of our 5 awards this evening. Now we have, for the first time, this year we're giving out 3 scholarships. On behalf of the Oakville District Labor Council, we're giving out 1 scholarship for $1,000 in the name of Stephen Lewis. We're also giving out a $500 scholarship in the name of George Hicks, and a $500 scholarship in the name of Linda Jones. Stephen Lewis, as everybody knows, we will talk more about later on this evening and hear from. George Hicks, I mentioned earlier on as being the longest serving executive in this country, and Linda Jones has been mentioned in great detail by Sandy Corrigan. We're honored to have all 3 of these scholarships this year for the first time, and we're actually very pleased that we have 2 of the 3 people they're named after with us this evening. Because Stephen Lewis is here, we're gonna ask Mr. Lewis to come up and draw the first name. What we ended up having was we put it out to all the local unions in our labor council to submit 3 names of kids that were in their first year of post-secondary education. We received 9 names this year, and I mean, I would like to see more names, but for the 9 people that have submitted the names on behalf of 5 different local unions, I want to say that this is a good opportunity for us to reach out into the community and get kids involved in what we do. There was questions that went along with each application as to what unions have done for them and what unions have done for their family, and where do they see the trade union movement in the future. Each local had different criteria as to how they selected it, how they selected the people, and these 9 children, young adults, were entering into post-secondary education, have the opportunity now to be selected. So we have 9 envelopes. The first envelope will be first envelope drawn will be for $1,000. The second and third will be for $500 each. And we'll ask George to come up and draw the second one in the George Hicks name. And I'll ask Sandy Corrigan to come up and draw the the third one on behalf of Linda Jones. Now each of these envelopes are unmarked. I put everybody's name on a yellow piece of paper, and so Syed Tauheed Imam is a Unifor 707 child of Syed Imam. He's attending his first year of civil engineering at the University of Toronto, and on behalf of ODLC, I'd like to congratulate him. George. The George Hicks Scholarship, $500, goes to Kelly Henley, who is an Edmo Halton child of John Henley, who is attending her first year of business accounting at Mohawk College. And then Sandy, can you come and draw the last one?
The odds are pretty good. Oh, I know. I know.
The Linda Jones Scholarship is going to Brianna Mullen, who's a Unifor 707 child of John Mullen. She's attending her first year of French language and literature at the University of Toronto. Congratulations to everybody. Now from here, we're going to go into the dinner, and hope everybody can enjoy the rest of their meal. And, what time do we start? I was going to say 7:15. So in about 5 minutes, what we'll do is we'll get started. We're going to shut the bar down. We're going to shut the bar down so everybody can listen to Mr. Lewis speak. So if you'd like to get a drink before we go on, you got about 5 minutes. So on behalf of the Government of Ontario, I am delighted to extend warm greetings to everyone attending the 13th Annual Activist Awards Banquet, organized by the Oakville District Labour Council. Tonight is indeed a special occasion to acknowledge the hard work of individuals who have distinguished themselves in the area of social outreach and humanitarianism. Your commitment to advancing the welfare of citizens is commendable, and I appreciate your contributions in helping build a more prosperous and fairer society where everyone can thrive regardless of their circumstances. I would also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the numerous contributions of one of our most influential advocates and commentators on social affairs, international development, and human rights. Former Canadian Ambassador to the United Nations and former United Nations Special Envoy for HIV and AIDS in Africa, Stephen Lewis, for his enormous contributions in promoting the social, political, and economic rights not only of all Canadians, but also of the people around the world. Mr. Lewis serves as a great inspiration and motivator for continued change, growth, and development, both here at home and abroad. And a special thanks to the Oakville District Labour Council for making this event possible. Please accept my best wishes for a memorable evening. Kathleen Wynne, Premier. Whether it's at a convention, an event like this, or a Jack Layton funeral, every time I hear Stephen Lewis speak in front of a crowd, I get goosebumps, and I'll tell you, it gives me no greater pleasure than being able to introduce him this evening. Stephen Lewis was the leader of the provincial NDP party for most of the 70s. At that same time, his father was also the leader of the federal party. A lot of people forget about that. A lot of people forget about that when they're hearing about Stephen Lewis. But the Lewis family has had a tremendous effect on not just the left wing, as people like to call it, or the NDP, but they've had an effect on multiple people, thousands, if not millions of people in this province, this country, and around the world. Stephen Lewis was appointed to the United Nations as a special envoy to HIV and AIDS, to work with HIV and AIDS in Africa in the 80s. He later on went to work with UNICEF, and now he's co-founder of the Stephen Lewis Foundation, and he works with the AIDS-Free Africa. At this point in time, I'd like to introduce, and if everybody could stand with me and give a warm round of applause and welcome to Mr. Stephen Lewis.
Thank you, everyone. I do apologize for intruding on your dinner and your coffee and your convivial chatter, and I shall speak for a brief period of time, although I'm in a Castro-like phase as I inch into my dotage, and I'm inclined to speak for hours. In fact, we can reopen the bar, you can go out and have a drink with friends, and come back in an hour or two and be confident that I'll still be speaking. I love it that I'm here on a night when you have provided awards and scholarships. I feel entirely privileged to be associated with one of the scholarships. I was overwhelmed by the recitation of municipal representatives who are here tonight. That's quite remarkable. I'm from Toronto, and I guess I should say to you with intense depth of feeling, could you possibly lend us your mayor? I don't even know who your mayor is. But it doesn't matter, because he or she will transcend the Toronto incumbent in every imaginable way. I'm entirely delighted to be here because it's a trade union gathering. You can't imagine how I'm nearly levitating on this platform and pulsating with pleasure to see a gathering of trade unionists. Trade unionism is in the DNA of the Lewis family, and it always has been and it always will be. My father, you know, wasn't only a member of parliament and at the time the leader of the NDP, but he was also, prior to that, a labor lawyer. He represented labor in one case after another before he moved on to a political career. And when I left politics, I was actually a labor arbitrator. I really loved that. As a matter of fact, a few days after I had resigned from the legislature back in 1978, I had a phone call from a fellow named Eddie Goodman, who was the bag man for the Conservative Party and raised money for William Davis, who was then the Premier in Ontario. And Eddie called me and said, Stephen, I'm asking you, would you like to be head of the Public Service Staff Relations Board? And I said, Eddie, you're nuts. I have no particular knowledge of or skills in the labor mediation or arbitration field. My dad knows these things, but I don't know them. He said, well, shouldn't you consider it seriously? And I said, no, I won't consider it seriously because I'm not qualified. There was a long pause, and he said, well, Stephen, then let me come clean with you. Premier Davis doesn't really think you'll be able to earn a living outside of politics. And he'd like to offer you this job as a compensatory possibility. And I thought that was very kind and generous, and I actually quite liked Bill Davis for that reason. Not the pre-Paleolithic Neanderthals who followed him, But in those days, the Tories were plausible. So I entered the world of labor arbitration. My God, it was the most bizarre world imaginable. It was fun because it was the class struggle. And every time you won a case, you felt good about eviscerating the corporate world. You can see that as I reach my geriatric state, I don't care what I say. But in truth, it always rendered the most implausible and unlikely happenstance. I remember when I was in Montreal, and I was doing an arbitration against the CBC. And it was on a particular contractual provision. Some of you in this audience will know it. It was the policy of the CBC after you had served 11 months as an employee to sever the tenure, and that way they didn't have to pick up the benefits, and then you would be re-employed for another 11 months. And it was a disgusting managerial ploy to prejudice the workers. On the other hand, it was in the contract. It was simply there in black and white. It was unanswerable. It was unmistakable. So we had the arbitration. And it was very painful because there wasn't a leg to stand on for the union. So it's over, and everybody leaves. And then the executive session takes place, which means that the chair, who's supposed to be neutral, and the management rep and the union rep, we get together, we have a little discussion about the outcome of the case. And I was ready to leave because the outcome was obvious. And the chair, who was a Quebec judge, says, well, it's absolutely clear the union has won this case. Management just doesn't have a leg to stand on. And I looked at him, I mean, with complete incredulity. I thought he'd lost his mind. And I said, Judge, you feel quite confident that that's the case? He said, absolutely. There's just no question of it. The management fellow had public apoplexy. He put on his coat and marched out in high indignation. And then the judge said to me, come along, Stephen, come along. Suddenly I was Stephen. And we walked down the hall to his offices. The hearing room was in the legal compound. We walked into his offices, and he closed the door, and he opened the drawer in his desk, and he took out a picture of the McGill Jewish Maccabean debating team in 1932. And in the picture, there was Senator Carl Goldenberg, who was the secretary-treasurer of the team, and the judge, who was the chair of the team. And sitting on the right hand of the judge was David Lewis, who was the assistant chair. And I suddenly understood why the union had won. And I thought to myself, I love arbitration. In a way, tonight for me is also an opportunity to tender thanks. Thanks for the support of the trade union movement, for my foundation, but even more insistently and strongly, thanks to Unifor Local 707 and all of the other locals in the room for the kind of support which has been extended to AIDS-Free World, which is an advocacy organization that I have the privilege of co-directing and had a part in the co-founding, and does a great deal of advocacy in the most difficult and contentious issues internationally around HIV and AIDS. But I thought rather than deliver a speech which might well be predictable, although many of the things I'm going to say will undoubtedly be predictable to some, I was very, very much taken with the awards and scholarship section of the evening. So I thought, if you will permit me, there's not a damn thing you can do about it. So I don't really have to ask for your indulgence. You don't have to invite me back. I'm going to frame my remarks around the awards and scholarships which were tendered tonight by the Labour Council, because it strikes me that they are illustrative of the themes which should animate a just and civilized society. And the first one, of course, went to Gary Beck, the president of Unifor Local 707, for the Political Activism Award. And I want to say to Gary, and I say it with some feeling, that the need for political activism in the trade union movement now has never been greater. And I think everybody understands that. Collectively, the trade union movement in concert, probably, I hope insistently and constantly, with the New Democratic Party. Lest you haven't discerned it yet, I have certain political prejudices, and I'm not going to contain them tonight, even though there are 2 Liberal MPPs in the room. I don't want them to have cardiac arrests, but on the other hand, I don't intend to restrain my feelings about what is happening in the country and the behavior of the federal government towards the public sector unions and the extraordinary dismembering of the public sector architecture in the service of providing a surplus a year or 2 from now so they can use it to fight an election shows such astonishing contempt for working people that it is deeply and profoundly offensive. And there is a kind of spiritual echo or mirror to that in the provincial Conservative Party, where there is this lust to remove not only the normal parameters of free collective bargaining, but also to remove the checkoff on which all of us have relied and have seen to be legitimate for so many years. And it shows collectively, federally and provincially, in 2 major political organizations, such remarkable contempt and indifference for the trade union movement. And it's not just ideological and rigid and dogmatic and unseemly and insufferable, but it's also wrong. There's just no understanding of what the trade union movement is. There's no appreciation of the century-long struggles for working people to achieve decent wages and benefits and health and safety and training and everything from questions of racism to questions of sexual harassment to questions of behavior in the workplace, all of the apparatus of occupational health and safety, the things for which trade unions have fought indelibly over the years. And then, because trade unions concentrate on their members but not at the exclusion of social justice, the humanity funds and the social justice funds reach out and work internationally on all of the human condition which is vulnerable and marginalized, and you find unions working on diseases and on poverty and on climate change and on the whole panoply of international issues which make this world worth living, provided we can change the world. And that's just so lovely about trade unions. That's what I've always had a deep affection for trade unions. Because there is amongst working people this natural affinity to do generous and decent things. And then it's mirrored in the trade unions who carry it forward. So here in Canada, I was jotting some of it down. We have such astonishing issues that have to be dealt with. The whole question of climate change and global warming and what it's going to do to this generation and future generations. What has happened in the Philippines is not an accident. The discharge of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere is compromising climatic weather conditions everywhere, whether it's a Katrina in New Orleans, or an earthquake in Haiti, or a tsunami in South Asia and Southeast Asia, or whether it's Hurricane Sandy and the inundation of the coastal regions of New York State and New Jersey, or what's happened to the drought in the western United States and what that has meant in agricultural production. All of these things are now over and over seen by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and other scientists as directly related to the discharge of carbon into the atmosphere. I was reading just today that in the next couple of days there's a monograph appearing demonstrating that the discharge of carbon has become so extraordinary that it leads now to the acidification of the oceans, so that the coral reefs and the biodiversity and the species on which the food chain depends are being decimated. And so it unfolds year after year, decade after decade. We are leaving to future generations a legacy which is terrifying. And the inability of governments to come to grips with looking at alternative and renewable energy supplies, taking the oil sands seriously, understanding the environmental imperatives, that gives us an agenda. It gives the trade unions an agenda. I have a wonderful daughter-in-law named Naomi Klein, and Naomi spoke at the Unifor founding convention, and she talked in significant measure about climate justice and climate change, and it was fascinating to see the way the trade union movement responded deeply, urgently, and that is so significant. And across the country, emerging more and more now are the Aboriginal issues. A few weeks ago, I was in Vancouver, and I was, forgive the title, an honorary witness at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission on Residential Schools. Now, I'm not a naive innocent. I've heard the most awful stories from the women who were raped and assaulted during the genocide in Rwanda. And in spending time on HIV/AIDS in Africa, I watched people die year after year and entered huts where mothers on a fetid mat on the floor were dying in the presence of their children. You see all of these manifestations of sadness and despair and anguish, and it doesn't leave your heart. It lives in your soul. But there I was in Vancouver, listening to women, mostly in their 60s and 70s, who came up to the platform and talked about their experience in residential schools. And I want to tell you, as a Canadian, I have never felt such shame. I could not believe that my country was capable of this behavior. The woman who said that at the age of 5, her mother had taken her to the residential school and outfitted her in a new dress for the occasion. And when she got to the auditorium where all of the kids were gathered, as soon as she entered the door, the sister, the nun, ripped her dress off her and gave her a ramshackle garb to wear thereafter. And she had long hair down to her waist, which her grandmother and mother told her defined her, was so important to her. And when she got to the front of the line, the sisters cut her hair off at the nape of the neck. And then in the evening, her first night there, she was raped. And she was raped again and again, week after week, for the years she spent in the residential schools. I remember the man who looked out at the commissioners in the audience and said, I was 11 years old when they pulled my pants down, and I didn't understand. And you sit there and you think to yourself, this is Canada. 150,000 to 250,000 kids torn from their heritage because governments and religious organizations decided to expunge the Aboriginal culture. That's what they were after, to destroy an entire culture on the rationale that they had to be integrated into non-Aboriginal Canadian society. It was stunning. I couldn't believe it. And I thought to myself, truth and reconciliation be damned. They should call it truth and retribution. Because honestly, you felt you wanted to clobber the people who were responsible. And these issues, which are so germane to Canada, so strong in Canada, whether it's jobs or whether it's housing or whether it's health care, in the year 2016, the federal government is going to start to reduce the percentage money which is allocated to the provinces for health care. I don't know how the province is going to be able to sustain the support. Today in the Globe and Mail, in the middle section of the Globe, there's a fascinating piece on inequality. The fact that 1% of income earners in Canada hold more than 10% of the total income. The fact that the 10% highest income earners in Canada hold more than 30% of the total income. The increasing inequality in the society is divisive and rancid and wrong. And these are issues which we can all take hold of. The political parties, the trade union movement in concert with New Democratic colleagues. I didn't really come here to make a political speech. I find myself doing that like some kind of Pavlovian who can't wrestle it free of my organic juices. But I have to say to you that every piece of my molecular structure cries out against the injustice and the inequality, which is so palpable, so obvious everywhere. And because I've had the privilege of working internationally for the last 25 or 30 years, I see the decline in Canada's presence and impact. The fact that we have dismantled the Canadian International Development Agency and shoveled it into foreign affairs. and told it that what it must do is finance Latin American countries and international trade deals rather than doing what most other Western powers are doing and investing in the poorest parts of the world, mostly Africa, sometimes parts of South Asia. The fact that our official development assistance has been frozen, and we now stand in the bottom 3 or 4 countries out of the 28 countries in the list of the OECD. The fact that we weren't even willing to pass a bill to provide generic drugs, generic antiretroviral drugs to treat and keep alive children in Africa, because we were afraid to offend the pharmaceutical industry or to embrace generics, which would suggest to the world that we weren't willing to extend patents. And to top it all off, and boy, is this an example for all of us to measure, the fact that for the first time in our history, when we ran for the Security Council, we were defeated. That's never happened to Canada before. It was stunning. There were 3 Western countries for 2 seats. Germany headed the polls on the first round. In the second round, it was Portugal. Now, don't get me wrong, I have a lot of regard for Portugal. It's a nice little country. I also have regard for Canada. In the normal course of events, Canada would have won overwhelmingly. The results of the vote coming in were so low for Canada that we actually withdrew so that the results could not be announced. The humiliation, the mortification would have been too great. So you see what the government is doing to the country. They are creating a new culture, a culture which has so much animosity and so much absurdity and so much incompetence. Just look at the Senate scandal. There is about this government a kind of demonic, rigid, punitive instinct. And it's not part of Canadian culture, Canadian life. Canadians are by and large moderate and gentle, and we're not given to hyperbole. That's my problem. It's not a Canadian problem. And I urge Gary, and I place it all on Gary, as the winner of the Political Activist Award. It is Gary's responsibility to confront all of this and to subdue it in the interests of the Oakville District Labour Council. Well, then we had the Linda Jones Women's Activist Award, and that was extremely touching and really evocative. The discussion of Linda Jones, and then Margaret Ferland receiving the award, and I thought it was particularly telling that it went to someone in the Elementary Teachers Association, because in my experience over the years, that's one of the finest associations that this province has yielded in the teaching profession. And I have a wife who has written about the association, the organization, on many occasions when she was a columnist with the Toronto Star. Some of you will know the name Michelle Landsberg, who was for 20 or 25 years an inspired, principled, uncompromising, indefatigable, gifted artisan of the left, a feminist, socialist columnist. It was wonderful. And for more than 50 years of marriage, I was able to phone home at every hour of the day or night and say, honey, what do I believe about so-and-so? And I was always told in no uncertain terms, and then you see I can come to gatherings like this and disgorge views that you mistakenly think are my own. But the beauty of having this award for women's activism is a recognition that the single most important struggle on the planet is the struggle for gender equality. That you cannot continue to marginalize. You cannot continue to marginalize 50% of the world's population and ever expect to approximate social justice or equity. It will not happen. And everywhere in this world, the struggle for equality goes apace. There isn't a single Western country which has equality, including this country for obvious reasons. And even now in Canada, Germany, the United Kingdom, women make 72 to 75 cents on the male dollar in exactly identical jobs. And in the developing world, you're dealing with international sexual trafficking, you're dealing with female genital mutilation, you're dealing with child marriage. That's really painful. 1 out of every 4 young women in the developing world marries under the age of 18. 1 out of every 7 marries under the age of 50. That means for a considerable period of their young lives, they are subject not only to child labor, but to marital rape. A little 8-year-old girl in Yemen, 10 days ago, bled to death on her wedding night, having been raped by a 40-year-old partner. And the excruciating agony of the child marriage phenomenon is something around which the world has to gather, and around which, of course, women's rights must be asserted. And whether you're talking about an absence of property rights, or an absence of inheritance rights, or an absence of economic autonomy, or political representation, or perhaps worst of all, the phenomenal contagion of sexual violence everywhere on the planet, whether it's marital rape, or intimate partner rape, or gang rape, or politically orchestrated rape, or rape in conflict countries. What happened in India on the terrible bus tragedy in December of last year, or repeated, mirrored in South Africa 3 years later, where a 17-year-old girl was assaulted by 3 and left to die on the roadside after being savagely raped, or whether it's the American military or the rapes in high school in Steubenville, everywhere you turn, this contagion of sexual violence is something that has to be met. So to give out an award for women's activism is singularly important, because the work that women do in the struggle for gender equality can never be overstated. And as someone who has spent a good deal of time in countries where sexual violence is acute, in Kenya, in Zimbabwe, in Liberia, and in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, it really unsettles the equilibrium, the intellectual and emotional equilibrium. In the eastern region of the Congo, in the southern capital of Bukavu, there's a little hospital called the Panzi Hospital, and it's headed by a lovely surgeon named Denis Mukwege. And he and a handful of other surgeons at the Panzi spend a great deal of time surgically repairing the reproductive tracts of the women. And I've stood at the door of the hospital and watched the women come in after assaults from marauding militias. And it's a desperate situation. And adjacent to the hospital now, there is a very considerable glimmer of hope, because there's something called the City of Joy, which was built under the auspices of V-Day, the NGO that was created by Eve Ensler, the woman who wrote the Vagina Monologues. And the City of Joy has 100 housing units. And the women who have been surgically repaired in the Panzi come to the City of Joy to convalesce in security, to learn a trade, to go back to their village, to lead with enormous resilience and courage the women to prevent the continued sexual violence. I was at the opening of the City of Joy. It's hard to convey to you, but there were some 2,000 to 3,000 women under a vast white tent, and they all had been brutally raped. And they were singing and dancing in a fashion which spoke to their enormous heart and determination. And the governor, with all his sycophants and satraps, was in the front row. And one young girl, she must have been 16 or 17 years old, she took the platform and she looked out at the audience and then right down at the governor. And she said, "Mr. Governor, you know why this is happening. If it were happening to men, it would have ended 15 years ago. But it's happening now because it's women. And truer words were never spoke." And it's so fascinating how this struggle for gender equality engages and must engage the response of the international community. And what I love about the trade union movement is the sense of equality that is growing within the movement, and the recognition that gender equality as a kind of representation of what the broader society should have can obtain within the trade union movement. And for the Women's Activist Award, there is a whole world to conquer. And then we came to the OFL Disability Response Team Award, the ODRT OFL Disability Response Team Award. And I was so fascinated. It was given so appropriately for John Watson, and he was extremely evocative in what he said, but I was so fascinated by the emphasis on the Workers' Compensation Board and the reference, if you will recall, to mesothelioma. Mesothelioma is a cancer that only emerges in the presence of asbestos. I represented the riding of Scarborough West from 1963 to 1978. In the 1970s, in my riding, a woman at the age of 39 emerged with mesothelioma. Nobody could figure out how it had happened. Nobody could see any connection to asbestos. Mesothelioma is always fatal. When we went back through the woman's history carefully, we learned that at the age of 16, she brought coffee to the production line of John's Manville once a day for one summer. And all those years later, she emerged with mesothelioma in the presence of the asbestos from John's Manville. And you can't imagine how hard we had to fight to get compensation. It drives me nuts that even today, people in the trade union movement have to fight so strongly to get compensation for working people, which they clearly deserve. And I wanted to mention another case which lives vividly with me in my mind, because again, it was a Scarborough West resident. In the year 1954, a man named Antonio Negro got the bends in a subway accident as they were beginning to build the subway system in Toronto. And it took us 18 years to persuade the Workers' Compensation Board that there should be compensation for the psychological consequences of an industrial accident. Because his whole life fell apart, his marriage fell apart, he began to be unable to function, there was evidence of declining mental health, his kids were frantic, the family was in total disarray, psychologically he was a mess, and we couldn't get the board to recognize that there were emotional consequences to an industrial accident. And it took 18 years with that bloody board before we could finally bring them around. And so when I hear the stories, even that I heard tonight, I thought to myself, it never ends. It's always constant. It is much improved over the days when I was in the legislature, that I know. I recognize I'm not so bloody-minded and perverse and begrudging as to fail to acknowledge it. But it's still tough on behalf of working people. So I must say that John Watson has his work cut out for him, but also this question of disability. I hope everyone in the room recognizes that we now have a convention on the rights of persons with disabilities. We never had it before. Canada has ratified that convention. That convention imposes obligations on the various levels of government because we have domesticated the convention. We have brought it into our laws. It places an obligation on the part of governments to respond to persons with disabilities in a way which is sensitive, appropriate, and total. Whether they are struggling with questions of sight or questions of hearing, or they are wheelchair bound, or there are intellectual disabilities. Do you know that for the first time ever 2 years ago, the World Health Organization produced the first report on disability? And they calculated that 15% of the world's population had a significant disability, and that amounts to 1 billion people. So to take disability seriously is a tremendous undertaking and an appropriate obligation when you have ratified the convention. And then the fourth person on the Health and Safety Activist Award, Mark Winton, who was very, very kind to me about the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And therefore I want to say to you that, yes, I argued the case in the Ontario legislature. But all the work was done by an astonishing research team which surrounded the New Democratic Party caucus when we were the official opposition. And particularly, I would mention her here, a gifted, astonishingly gifted young woman named Linda Jolly, who ended her work as a vice president of the Workers' Compensation and Safety Board. Linda died at the age of 68 so prematurely just 1 month ago. But she did the extraordinary accumulation of the evidence and the data of the workers in Elliott Lake and Sudbury who had died as a result of exposure to radon daughters in the uranium mines. Rio, Algam, and Denison were the two countries in the uranium mines of Elliott Lake. And it told you another story. The story was that the workers were dying of lung cancer. The workers were dying of silicosis. They didn't understand the depths of the injuries. They didn't understand why it was happening. They knew there was something wrong with the levels of exposure, but the companies never shared the information with them, and every time they went to the Workers' Compensation Board, they were shot down. This is in the 1970s. And suddenly, at a meeting in Lausanne, France, or Switzerland, I guess Lausanne's in Switzerland, at a meeting in Lausanne, it was revealed in a scientific seminar that the deaths from cancer and the disease from silicosis in Elliott Lake were way ahead of similar situations in other mining and extractive industries around the world. But more important, the level of death was way beyond what should have been expected in that population under normal circumstances. And suddenly the miners and the steelworkers who were involved with them so deeply at the time, the miners and the steelworkers in Elliott Lake heard as a result of a conference in Lausanne what was happening to their lives in Ontario. It was extraordinary. I'm difficult around multinational corporations. I don't have a lot of patience for the guff and BS which they so readily disgorge. As far as I'm concerned, I have rarely found evidence of corporate social responsibility. That mantra that they all trot out, that self-serving nonsense at every opportunity. It's just, every time you look at it, there's another flaw. Because all it is self-promoting, self-aggrandizement for the purposes of a burgeoning balance sheet. And then you pick up the newspaper and you find that Johnson & Johnson, the pharmaceutical company, has been fined $2.2 billion for dishonesty in the peddling of a particular drug for purposes for which it wasn't intended. And you ask yourself over and over again, if it be done in the pharmaceutical industry and in the oil and natural gas extractive industries, what's happening in the rest of the multinational world? They get together in Davos, Switzerland in January of every year, and they set out the regulations for humankind. I've never been invited to Davos. And maybe that's why I'm irritated. I'm a little bit proud of it, but I would love to have a platform there just once. I mean, they get Bill Gates, Bill Clinton, Bono. You'll notice the gender equity. And I've often thought I wouldn't mind observing it, but this is where the band of multinational corporations get together to decide how they'll rule the world. And I'm telling you, this corporate social responsibility stuff is such nonsensical, self-serving rubbish that it drives me crazy. But you compare that corporate social responsibility with the refusal to tell workers what their lives consist of and what the risks and hazards are in the environment of the workplace, and you'll see what it all really means. So as far as I'm concerned, Mark Winton, you have an extraordinary opportunity in health and safety, because we did get a Health and Safety Occupational Act, an Occupational Health and Safety Act in Ontario in 1978, after a Royal Commission called the Ham Commission looked into the health and safety of workers in the mining industry. And then, of course, there is Sue-Ann Tippel and the Barney Banavac United Way Social Activist Award. And I have to say I love that too, because in a way the United Way fills in where governments fail to tread. And they do it with full heart. And raising that many millions of dollars is really quite an extraordinary accomplishment. And I was thinking to myself, I was jotting down some notes. Gone are the days when I could speak without notes, and gone are the days when I could see my notes. But I'm struggling through, and I'm noticing that the United Way deals with youth, with single-parent families, usually mother-led, with mental health, with addictions, with shelters, with a variety of housing issues, and food banks. Do you know that 414,000 people in Ontario used food banks in March of 2012, the last year for which statistics are available? 414,000, and 40% of that 414,000 were children. What kind of society is it, with all of the privileges which we absorb, that we maintain between 10 and 12% of the population below the low-income cutoff line in a situation of poverty, and that poverty extends so dramatically to children? So again, to be engaged in the United Way, to attempt to fill the gaps that government so willfully creates, neglects, and ignores, that's an exemplary thing to do. And it's a tribute to all of you to support it so strongly. And I have to say to Sue-Ann, it's a wonderful award to have reached. So in all of those areas, political activism and women's rights and disability and health and safety and United Way, tonight you have conferred on your colleagues awards which recognize the role that the trade union movement and the activists perform in the community. And one of the reasons I was so tickled to come here tonight and be invited by Dave is that when I spoke at one of the former unions, part of Unifor, I love Unifor, I love the name. Do you see how exquisitely it rolls off the tongue? Unifor. It has an almost musical, almost lyrical intonation. I use it to put my grandson to sleep. Unifor. It works wonderfully well. And Unifor allowed me to come to the convention and to thank everyone for supporting the work of AIDS Free World, which is the organization whose logo you saw on the screens. And we have for 6 years now been involved in the creation of a United Nations Agency for Women, which was successfully created, called UN Women. We are an avowedly feminist organization, so that felt just right. We are working on LGBT rights in the Caribbean. We have 5 major legal cases proceeding in Jamaica, Trinidad, and Belize to confront the governments and their maintenance of homophobia and the criminalization of homosexuality, which is one of the ugliest facets of modern human rights discourse. We're deeply, deeply engaged in the narrative of the prevention of sexual violence. We hope to have a kind of pilot test in 10 different countries in 20 sites to show that prevention of sexual violence is possible, because up until now, all of the money going to questions of violence and rape goes to healing the women after the rapes have occurred. We're working on disability, we're working on tuberculosis, because people who have HIV and AIDS are co-infected with tuberculosis. We're working on something called treatment as prevention in the face of AIDS. I think I can convey it with almost boulderized simplicity. When you're on full antiretroviral treatment for HIV and AIDS, it reduces the viral load in the body to undetectable levels. You take the drugs, 3 drugs in 1 pill, taken once a day. It reduces the viral load in the body to undetectable levels, so that if you then have unprotected sex, you do not transmit the virus. So the more people you get into treatment, the more likely you're bringing an end to the pandemic, because the virus will not be transmitted. And this has been demonstrated now in study after study. And we are in AIDS Free World right at the heart of dealing with this. I'm off to Cape Town in 10 days or a couple of weeks to attend a conference which will address precisely these issues. And of course, we're always talking about resources. You know, I spent between 2001 and 2006 working on HIV and AIDS in Africa. in the high prevalence countries. There is a tendency now to believe that it's a chronic disease and largely over. It's not true. There are roughly 10 million people in treatment. There are 35 million people living with the virus. And whether we can roll out the antiretroviral drugs fast enough to prevent a further cataclysm of death is anyone's guess. So all around the world, activists are working at it feverishly. And it does the heart good to know that within the trade union movement, in the humanity funds and the social justice funds, and just the consciousness and awareness and decency which suffuses the trade union movement, that there are people everywhere who care about these issues and understand that life is not merely domestic, but there are international repercussions as well. So I thank you from the depths of my being. And you can't imagine how tickled I am to be in a trade union environment. My God, I'm positively intoxicated. I will levitate all the way home. I hope that the corporate people who have heard the speech or will hear the speech will be inflamed with rage and alienated. In AIDS-free world, we are masters of alienation. We alienate everyone in sight, and we love it. I'm tired of all the consensus building. I'm tired of all the mollifying. I'm tired of all the moderation. There comes a moment in time and in life when patience runs out. And in this country, at this time, patience should run out, and the trade unions can lead the charge. Thank you.
At this point in time, on behalf of the Oakville District Labor Council, we have a check to go to Tides Canada Foundation, which is who we're going to send the check to on behalf of Stephen Lewis for attending this evening. It's for $5,000, and I just like put it as a token of appreciation for your attendance. Thank you, sir. Being a local labor council, we like to push that we keep things local, and we like to tell people it's one of our through our CAW days, Buy Canadian, keep things local. What we've done on behalf of the labor council is we've had a student from Sheridan College who has made something up, a token of appreciation from the labor council to Mr. Lewis for attending with us this evening. Rita can talk more about it.
There's nothing to say. It's actually a teacher at Sheridan College who was absolutely honored and thrilled to be able to make this for Mr. Lewis. So on behalf of the Oakville District Labor Council, thank you, Mr. Lewis, for coming out tonight.
You'll see that it has it's very heavy. It's fortunate I'm so strong. You'll see that it has the AIDS ribbon beautifully inset into this glass creation. You know, I shall put it on my mantle. You will appreciate this, I hope. I will put it next to the bust I have of Nelson Mandela. Thank you all.
So this concludes the formal part of the evening. We are going to ask that all the award recipients come up for a picture with Stephen Lewis, and we're also going to ask that the executive of the Oakville District Labor Council come up so we can do a picture with the with our speaker for this evening, and then we're going to make. I don't know how much time Mr. Lewis has afterwards, but I'm pretty sure he's going to try to talk to a couple of you anyway. So thank you everybody for attending this evening.